We'll get going then. So hello everybody and welcome to July's Armchair Travel event. It's lovely to see so many of you joining us again this evening. This event is hosted by Last Frontiers, who have been organising tours to Latin America with us for the last 5 years. I'm also delighted to introduce and welcome this evening's speaker, James Lowen, Cambridge alumnus, professional photographer and former tropical conservation biologist. God, a bit of a mouthful. Just to remind you all, the Armchair Travellers event series is recorded, so including this evening's event. So if you've missed any of our previous talks, these can be found on the Cambridge Alumni website. I'll now hand over to Ed from Last Frontiers.
Thank you very much, Claire. That's really kind. Welcome everyone to this Armchair Travel event on the wildlife of Antarctica. My name is Ed Payne, and my company, Last Frontiers, has been running alumni tours for Oxford and Cambridge for some years now. We're a specialist tour operator to Latin America, mainly for independent travellers. And of course, we include Antarctica in Latin America, since you nearly always have to go there to get there, if you see what I mean. And we've organised alumni trips to Argentina, Chile, Colombia, and Peru with themes as diverse as archaeology and astronomy. We have a lovely little hardback book. If any of you haven't got one, please just send me an email as per the email address on the screen. I'm just very quickly going to mention our 2024 tours, of which there are 3 with a South America bent. In April, we have a trip to Mexico to see a total solar eclipse with Professor Roger Davis from Oxford. I'm only going to mention that briefly because we only have 1 room left. It's amazing how far in advance hotels get booked up for eclipse tours. And then in late April next year, David Beresford-Jones is leading a trip to Peru with a focus on the enigmatic Nazca lines, which is his area of specialism. Some of you may have heard the fascinating talk that David gave at a previous Armchair Travel event about a year ago now, which is available on the Cambridge website to listen again. And since then, I'm really happy to say that Peru seems to be firmly on the path back to stability after January's political unrest lost public support, particularly in areas popular with tourism. So if anyone would like further details of either of those, please look on the Cambridge or our website for further details. There's a link there to our website. Now, in November next year, James is going to be accompanying a rather special Antarctic trip. And the main objective of which is going to be to reach a remote colony of emperor penguins on Snow Hill Island, something that can only be attempted at certain times of year and which is also subject to pack ice conditions. The boat we're going to be on is the Ortelius. It's operated by Ocean-Wide Expeditions, who have years of experience in Antarctica. And as far as the emperor penguins are concerned, the great advantage of the Ortelius is she has a helipad. So one goes from the edge of the pack ice to Snow Hill Island by helicopter. Very exciting. And James is going to be on hand on both aboard and during shore excursions to provide added guidance and context to the wildlife and photographic advice for alumni participants. It's not an exclusive alumni trip, but there will be an alumni group. That's the intention. Again, if anyone would like further details, please just send me an email as per email on the screen. Anyway, on to the talk. James, as Claire said, is a professional photographer. He's a former tropical conservation biologist. He's been a team naturalist on many Antarctic cruises. He's also an award-winning author, and of particular relevance this evening is his book, Antarctic Wildlife, a Visitor's Guide, which is published by Princeton University Press and has had tremendous reviews. So without further ado, James, I'm going to stop my screen sharing and hand over to you. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ed. Yeah, it's very exciting to talk to you tonight. I'm also very excited about the expedition cruise next year. It'll be an absolute joy. Right, so I'm going to give you about 35 to 40 minutes worth of insights into what an expedition cruise is like, the type of thing that you would experience as a visitor in Antarctica. Ed's given a bit of an overview as to who I am, but I was at Emmanuel College in the early 90s. I had careers in international conservation and in central government before moving to Argentina to live for several years. And there I was lucky enough to become a ship naturalist on Antarctic expedition ships. So I had icebergs outside my bedroom, and my days consisted of showing people some of the best of the world's wildlife. So I was really fortunate for several years. And in the end wrote this book that Ed alluded to, and even 10 years after publication, it's still the must-have guide for people visiting Antarctica who have an interest in wildlife. It's one of a number of books I've written, and 3 of which have won awards or become longlisted for them. So I write mainly about the nexus between wildlife, travel and conservation. But we're here to head to Antarctica, our virtual travel to the 7th continent, the white continent, the blue continent even. And it's a very long way from Cambridge, or indeed from wherever in the world, I would wager, that you're watching this. It's also a very large continent. So Antarctica is the world's largest island. So it's perhaps unsurprising that roughly 99.x% of all tourist journeys there visit only the most northerly and the warmest extremity, which is the tiny peninsula, the Antarctic Peninsula, marked by the red arrow on the left of that map. The vast majority of cruises to the peninsula depart from Ushuaia in Argentina, in an area of Argentina known as Tierra del Fuego, the land of fire, known also informally as the uttermost ends of the world, because it's so far south. And then the ship will typically run the watery, windy gauntlet, the fabled Drake Passage, the furious 40s and 50s, before reaching the subantarctic islands of South Shetland or the Antarctic Peninsula itself. And those dotted lines and brown lines indicate the rough trajectories of many an Antarctic cruise ship. Now, Antarctic tourism started just over 50 years ago, in 1969. Last year, over 100,000 people visited Antarctica. Vessels vary very much in size, from yachts with just 12 passengers right up to floating towns with 3,000. But an optimum size is roughly 80 to 200 passengers. And I'm pleased that the Ortelius, the vessel that Ed has chosen for this trip, fits nicely into that optimum size. Trips tend to cover the period from October through till March, which is when the southern conditions are at their most clement. It's summer down there. But each month really does offer a very different experience. So what you get in November is very different to what you get in March, just as in Britain, April varies very much from July. Now, Antarctica is renowned for its geology, for its scenery, for its ice, its snow, and its glaciers. And it's also renowned for its history, particularly the history of exploration. And that exploration continues, right until today. Scott in the Antarctic, one of the most famous, Shackleton, of course, a whole host of great household names associated with Antarctica. And you could equally have this talk on the geology of Antarctica or on the history of Antarctic exploration. But my thing is wildlife. It's birds and it's mammals in an Antarctic context. So that's what I'm going to be talking to you tonight. And what I'm going to do is give you an outline of a typical Antarctic trip from a wildlife watcher's perspective, and give you a rough flavour for how the journey might unfold over time. So I'll talk about what we think of as the 3 stages in an Antarctic journey. Land with Tierra del Fuego, the Beagle Channel, ocean, the Drake Passage, and then the 7th continent, the Antarctic Peninsula itself. So we'll start with land. So this is the Beagle Channel, right at the southernmost extent of Argentina. And it's 4+ hours flight from the capital of Buenos Aires. So it's a long way south Argentina is a very large country. Indeed, you could fit almost all the countries of Western Europe within the confines of Argentina and probably still have a bit of space left over. So Argentina itself is a long country, a big country, and it makes sense to arrive a day before your cruise starts, so perhaps to explore a little of Tierra del Fuego. And you can plenty to do here. You can climb up the mountain that sits above the city of Ushuaia to visit the Marshall Glacier, or you could head into the southern beech forest of Tierra del Fuego National Park to see birds such as the Magellanic woodpecker, one of the largest woodpeckers in the world, or indeed the world's southernmost parrot, the Austral parakeet. But all that really is just amuse-bouche. It's a starter, not even a starter. Your appetite for something more will be straining, and eventually that bell will ring for dinner proper, and that's what that means. It's embarkation time. It's time to board your ship and time to head south. And you do so with a backdrop of the southern tip of the Andes. It's a spectacular place, a really exciting and inspiring setting for what should hopefully be one of the journeys, if not the journey of your life. And things a little bit you're a little bit nervous at the start as you board. You hand over your luggage to the expedition staff. Luggage gets taken away and you hope that it's going to reach your wonderful room, and you board the ship. And everyone's getting very excited, and eventually, the anchor is weighed and the captain sounds the horn, which suggests that departure is imminent. And then you wave goodbye to Ushuaia, you wave goodbye to South America, you wave goodbye to land, to continental landmass, and head off on your wonderful adventure. Now, the Beagle Channel is the start of the journey, and it's not one to be sniffed up because there's plenty of wildlife to watch if you can get yourself away from the exhilaration of what's going to happen tomorrow when we get into the Drake Passage and what's going to happen in 3 days' time, or 2 days' time once we reach Antarctica. But the Beagle's great for wildlife watching, so there's plenty of birds around. Dolphin gulls are very attractive. You might see Chilean skuas attacking upland geese. We also, on a ship, go past some islands in the middle of the channel which hold South American sea lions and South American fur seals, so you pass by these. And then there are seabirds that start to come in. So we think of seabirds as birds of the ocean, but they head into the Beagle Channel. So we see our first sooty shearwaters, a bird that amazingly we actually get in the UK too. But here they're in their element, they're close to their breeding grounds. And even though we're still quite close to Ushuaia, we're still not an open ocean, you'll be seeing other large ocean-going birds, such as the giant petrels. This one's a southern giant petrel, and these are really big bruisers of birds, far bigger than our gannets and far heftier too, with this wonderful tube-nosed apparatus of a bill, which allows them to sift salt and thus survive out at sea. And if we're seeing giant petrels, then hopefully we'll see our first albatross. And when you've seen your first albatross, it's not quite life is complete, but it takes it to another level. So this is the black-browed albatross, which will doubtless be the first albatross that we glimpse on our wonderful Antarctic journey. Robert Cushman Murphy was a great US conservationist, and I think he said something along the lines of, "I now belong to the cult of higher mortals, for I have seen the albatross." And every time I see an albatross, and I've seen quite a few, I think of that. I think how privileged I am to have witnessed these amazing birds. But as we start to see dusky dolphins, we know that we must be nearing the mouth of the Beagle Channel. And the mouth of the Beagle Channel means the Atlantic. And as you skirt the Chilean coast towards Cape Horn, that means only one thing: the Drake Passage. Now, the Drake Passage, named after Sir Francis, it takes 1 or 2 days, usually a day and a half, to cross on a typical ship. Compared to the whole of Antarctica, it's actually a very small stretch of sea, very small indeed. But it's a fabled stretch of sea because this is a place where there is no land around the circumference of the globe, and so any winds that start and can proceed unfettered by mountains or by other landforms, and so the winds can be fairly strong, and people are often rather worried that they might create quite a stormy sea. And it's fair to say that the Drake Passage can indeed be quite stormy. but this is fabulous for watching seabirds. But most of the time, it's not actually that stormy. It's actually what we call the Drake Lake. It's actually very, very calm. It's flat as a pancake. It's great for your stomachs. It's great for seeing whales and dolphins, but it's less good for seeing albatrosses, which sit sedately on the water rather than flying around. So your Drake experience is quintessential part of the Antarctic experience. I'm very keen that when I'm with clients on board a ship, I take them out onto the deck and show them what can be seen. Not only is it great to look at the horizon for settling your stomach, sorting out your balance, it's great to look out to sea for wildlife as well. So there's plenty to see. We'll start with some of the dolphins and whales that you can see, some of the mammals. So hourglass dolphin is an oceanic classic, really splendid species with its black and white coloration. And there's also whales in abundance. So here's a fin whale, and the views of this animal, which is the second largest creature ever to have been on Earth, only kind of beaten by the blue whale. Views can be really quite good, and it really is worth looking out to sea. And the longer you look and the harder you look, there's so many other species to look out for, from sperm whales to orcas to various beaked whales to some other dolphins as well. So lots of mammalian potential out there, lots of cetacean excitement. And if there's no whales, or if it's hard to see whales, then there would doubtless be seabirds around. There's a whole spectrum of sizes involved. So from the tiny Wilson's petrel, Wilson's storm petrel, which is not much bigger than a swallow, say. It's sort of a swallow of the sea. A little bit larger than that, but not much, fluttering around just above the waves. And you go up a notch in size and you see prions that somehow manage to shear their way between these waves, between the swell, without getting caught in any way, or indeed even wet. Another step up the size ladder is the Cape petrel, also known as the Pintado petrel. Pintado meaning painted in Spanish, which I think is a really quite a good, lovely word for it. And then there's the southern fulmar. Some of you may know that the fulmar that we get on the Britain's coasts, nests up in Yorkshire for a start. And this is the southern equivalent, looks very, very similar. Even larger, there's the white chin petrel, which is the first of many red data book species. Now, these are species that are globally threatened with extinction. And a lot of the seabirds that you'll be seeing on the Drake Passage are indeed globally threatened. And it's primarily as a result of being, unfortunately, bycatch in longline fisheries in the Southern Ocean. So this is the white chin petrel. And then we've got another giant petrel. This one's the northern giant petrel. It's sort of misnamed, doesn't really occur any further north than the southern giant petrel, but you can tell it apart because it's got a little red tip on its bill. And the joy of Antarctica is actually these birds come close enough for you to see such tiny little details. And when you've got a bird with a 2 to 2.5 meter wingspan flying past at around 10 meters range, it really is exciting. But from giant petrels beyond to albatrosses. Now, we'll have seen our first black-brown albatrosses in the Drake Passage, but hopefully by now we'll be seeing plenty. These birds will sort of see the ship as an interest feature in an otherwise kind of flat landscape. They may also mistake it for a fisheries vessel and sense that there's a possibility of food. Either way, it's quite common for large numbers of albatrosses to follow the ship for several hours at a time. And that makes for really exciting wildlife watching. And these birds really do have very long wings indeed. So this is about a 2.5 meter wingspan, roughly 2.5 meters. There are other species of albatrosses as well. There's the grey-headed albatross, which breeds in South Georgia. There's my personal favorite, the light-mantled albatross, which also breeds in South Georgia, but kind of heads over into the Drake Passage to eat. And then some of the larger albatrosses, what are called the great albatrosses. These are birds with a wingspan of 3 to 3.5 meters, true giants, the largest routinely flying birds that there are, some even with wingspans nearing 4 meters. So this is the wandering albatross, and this is the royal albatross, the southern royal albatross. Those little things sat around the southern royal albatross, by the way, are black-brown albatrosses. So you can get a sense of If I said that the black-browed albatross had a wingspan of 2+ meters and is a really big bird, this thing is an absolute giant. And then you put all these seabirds together, and you see that quite how many different adaptations there are for life in the southern oceans, from the tiny Wilson's petrel down in the bottom right to the giant wandering albatross top right. But now, after a day and a half of looking out to sea, the waters, if they were choppy, begin to calm, and we know that we're approaching the Antarctic Peninsula. And at some point, at that point, the quantity and variety of seabirds will decrease, and either the first iceberg will kind of cleave into view, or the first smudge of land will hover into view. And you know that you're now approaching Antarctica. So where you go really does depend on what itinerary your ship has chosen. The one we've chosen for next year's alumni cruise is essentially the northeast Antarctic Peninsula, shown over on the right here. But there's a whole number of landing sites across the Antarctic Peninsula, actually far more than are shown in this map. Several areas that were visited, so the South Shetland Islands, just off the peninsula, just to the north, typically a first port of call, and then the northwest Antarctic Peninsula, somewhere some of the sort of the heaviest tourism traffic is. Very few ships make it down to the southwest Antarctic Peninsula. It's quite a long way to go, but the Lemaire Channel is nicknamed Kodak Alley on account of its scenicness. But it's the really intrepid ships, the sort of the exclusive journeys, if you like, that make it to the now northeast Antarctic Peninsula. So the areas here are Brown Bluff, Paulet Island, Seymour Island, and most famously Snow Hill Island, which is where the emperor penguins breed, and which will be the focus of our cruise next year. And it's a really, really exciting, really wild place to visit. So the first thing you'll notice when you reach Antarctica is not the wildlife. You'll forget that. Even I forget that. You'll notice the ice, and the ice on the sea, and the ice on the land, glaciers and snow everywhere. And you'll just spend hours upon hours looking at the ice scenery, because every single vista is different. The light will catch an iceberg in a particular way, or an iceberg will kind of cleave off into different parts, or you'll turn around a corner and the wind will have sculpted the ice into yet another series of remarkable landforms. You may even come across these great, huge tabular bergs, parts of the proper Antarctic ice sheet that have sort of separated themselves from Antarctica proper. And wherever you go, there'll be unexpected things. So who knew that ice was blue? I certainly didn't on my first trip, and that's another reason why the white continent, as Antarctica is known, is also called the blue continent, because of this remarkable coloration. Absolutely amazing. I never, ever tire of looking out the window or getting out on board and seeing what there is to see. There's even, remarkably, jade icebergs. Now, a geologist will be able to explain how this has come together. I'm merely a wildlife person, I can't do that. And even around icebergs, I do find myself distracted, because icebergs themselves are habitats, and they're habitats for some of the most special birds that Antarctica has to offer. In this case, the snow petrel, which absolutely loves floating ethereally around ice, and only occasionally does it land on the sea. It's a delicate, almost dove-like bird, absolutely special, and renowned for being the bird that breeds the furthest south of any bird species on the planet. It should really be called the Antarctic petrel, I would say, but unfortunately this bird is the Antarctic petrel, so it's already nicked the name. And that's another speciality. You only see this around icebergs around the Antarctic Peninsula. It never heads very far north into the Drake Passage, so this is definitely one for the bird watchers to look out for. And as you're cruising around, you'll start to see other things as well. You'll start to bump into icebergs that are being used as ships by penguins for those hitchhikers that are unable to fly. And how wonderful is this? Look at the sea. The sea is sort of boiling with penguins down there, and they're somehow throwing themselves out of the water onto this iceberg so that they can have a bit of rest and be transported away from their breeding colonies. So let's look a little bit more about the experience of wildlife watching in Antarctica. and some of the species you might see there. So we'll start by leaving the boat. We're leaving the ship, and we're going to head out on these inflatable ribs called zodiacs, and we're going to cruise around without actually landing at all. We're just going to cruise around and see what we can see. And yes, we can get close views of our first penguins as they sit above these icebergs. And perhaps some of the flatter icebergs will be adorned with a leopard seal, one of the major apex predators of Antarctica, sharing that apex of that pyramid with orcas, I would say. And these seals, they comprise 3 or 4 meters of pure muscle and bristly intent, with great fangs as well. You wouldn't want to get too close to those gnashes, I wouldn't have thought, unless you happen to be very, very brave penguins and you're very happy going up to those. They're also quite inquisitive creatures, so they will come up and have a look at your zodiac as you're cruising around. It's not a dangerous creature. You're not going to get in the water with them. They're not going to get in your zodiac. But it's certainly a bit of a thrill of Antarctica, is to be within a few meters of these amazing animals. Whales, absolutely. You can see whales at very close range as well. Literally, just 5 or 10 meters away. So this is a humpback whale approaching very, very close to this zodiac on which some coins were there. And an orca. Orcas will also come close to zodiacs, and seeing an orca at this range, shooting this with a wide angle lens, is very, very special indeed. So orcas, also known as killer whales. Interestingly, there are possibly 4 different ecotypes of killer whales down in Antarctica, and people are trying to work out whether they are the same species or whether they are different species, but they do have quite different characteristics. Doesn't really matter. They're all orcas. They're all thrilling. They're all amazing creatures. Other whales you can see. So Antarctic minke whales are very much a feature of these southern oceans, and they too can be rather curious. I suspect they rather see the zodiac rib as a friend, or just checking it out, saying, "But why that funny whale isn't going underwater and just staying on the surface?" And perhaps it thinks the rib is its brother or something like that. And if you're really, really lucky, and if you keep really sharp eyes out, you might see something truly special. So on my very first Antarctic cruise, I was lucky enough to spot this southern blue whale, so the largest whale in Antarctic waters. And it's a great thing when you're sharing a few 100 meters of water with the largest creature that's ever roamed in. But anyway, at some point, cruising is great, but it's also tantalizing because you want to get to shore, to set foot on Antarctica itself. So you will land, your zodiac will pull up, and the expedition leader, or whoever's managing the shore landing, will give you a greeting and a briefing, explain how you get onto the land safely, and what the particular route is, what the activities are for that particular landing. And there's also going to be beautiful scenery for walking. It's really quite splendid hiking up somewhere like this on the South Shetlands of Antarctica. But what you really want to do is see some wildlife, and there's loads of good wildlife. And if you've been to the Galapagos, I'm sure some of you have, and you've seen the wildlife, that it just allows such wonderfully close approach. It doesn't seem to be bothered at all. And as for wildlife, there's mammals and there's birds in such profusion at such close range. Then Antarctica is like that, only roughly twice as good. There are twice as many animals, and it's twice as thrilling wildlife watching. So we're going to start with some of the seals, some of the mammals. This is the Antarctic fur seal, and this is the Weddell seal. It always seems to be smiling, this creature, as if it's had a really good meal of krill. There's the kind of small plankton that basically keep the whole of the Antarctic food chain going. And then you might get these rolling groups of molting southern elephant seals. I think he was being a bit rude, this one, I have to say. I told him off afterwards. Plenty of birds too, large colonies of various species. Here's the Antarctic or blue-eyed shag, a very attractive species, far more so than our cormorants. And wherever you get these seabird colonies, you get skuas hanging out. And the skuas hang out because they're trying to grab eggs, or they're trying to grab chicks, that type of thing. or potentially even feeding on the odd bit of offal that may be around. So there are brown skuas here, and there are South Polar skuas. The two are quite tricky to tell apart. But we've got skuas equivalent to these up in the Shetland Islands called Great skuas or bonxies. So rather familiar seabirds for people who know their stuff. Slightly odder creatures, certainly unfamiliar, and also other scavengers around these seabird colonies, are these creatures that are called snowy sheathbills. These are the cleaners of Antarctica. And they eat anything from seal afterbirth to penguin poo. Anything where there's a possibility of getting a bit of nutrients, these birds will clear it up. And they're delightfully tame and also delightfully curious. They'll regularly come alongside you on land, even come and investigate if you've got any food in your rucksack, which of course you haven't because you've respected biosafety protocols and not brought anything like that to land. And in flight, they're sort of ugly beautiful, I think, half wonderful, half not, almost dove-like in flight. But what we're really after, the birds you're most keen to see, I know, are the penguins of Antarctica. And they often betray their presence with these krill poo-stained passageways through the snow. These are sort of the penguin superhighways, if you like. And there's plenty of opportunities to get ashore and to experience colonies of the various commoner Antarctic species. And the sight and the sound, and I admit the smell of penguin colonies provides an absolute assault on the senses. Mainly in a good way, apart from the smell, which isn't really good. But we'll pass over that. Adelie penguins, this is the first one I'm going to look at here. That's the bird that's featured here. The smallest penguin in Antarctica. These are the cute little ones, if you like, with the monocles, the little white monocles on them. And you see these, doing so many things. You see their whole life cycles going on, depending which time of year you arrive. They might be displaying, they might be laying eggs, they might be incubating, they might be feeding chicks, they might have finished the whole cycle and be off molting. But whatever they're doing, it's impossible not to stop watching them because they're so good. They're so fun. These ones are really trepidatious about entering the water just in case there's a leopard seal waiting offshore to hunt them. But they're a good swimmer once they get there. So as long as there's no leopard seals, they'll be fine. They'll head off hunting. And they often pose for photos, these penguins, and then every so often they get photobombed by another species, such as here, the Gentoo penguin, which is one of the larger penguins in Antarctica. Not the largest, you know what that is, but the only one with a red bill and a little white flash over the eye. And Gentoos are really distinctive for those two features, that red flash and that red bill and that white flash. I really like Gentoo penguins. I love the red insides of their mouth as they throw back their heads to call for a mate, or the wonderful weaving display that a pair have as they kind of bend down towards the ground and weave their neck around with their bills open. They're not actually saying anything, sort of in silent display. And then their chicks, of course. So if all goes well, they have eggs and they have chicks. And once those chicks grow up, they head out to sea and they hopefully survive to breed another year. And I say hopefully because during the tourist season, the weather is normally pretty good. It's not particularly cold. It's only around 0 degrees. It's around freezing. But as winter approaches, so towards the end of the tourist season, towards March, for example, this is a reminder that the penguins have to endure rather quite harsh conditions. That they can't go home like we do, back up to the northern hemisphere and have a nice time again. They have to survive the Antarctic winter. And I'm afraid some don't make it, or some do make it, but get a bit confused about who their partner's meant to be. Right, let's head on to chinstrap penguins. I think of all the Antarctic penguins, this is probably my favourite. And just because it's so cheeky, and because it's such a strong mountaineer. So the other penguins tend to stay rather close to the sea. But some chinstrap penguins nest way inland, and some, such as these, on a place called Spigot Peak, nest right at the top of mountains. So you've got to climb up a hill to see the colony. It's quite remarkable. But these mountaineers, they're braying and they're stocky birds, and they too have another wonderful head weaving display, entirely silent as they move their head around. And you may recognize this photo because it made the front cover in the end. But if we're really lucky, and next November to December, we certainly intend to be very lucky, the penguin that we all want to see is the emperor penguin. And it may get views of something like this, such as just a juvenile that's hanging out in a place it shouldn't really be. But what we're really after are the adults, the wonderful adult emperor penguins. And there really is no species quite like that. And I mean that literally. If you have a look at the size chart, you'll be able to see the kind of spectrum of penguins that occurs in Antarctica and the surroundings. So from the southern rockapple penguin on the far left, through the Adelie penguin, 3 in from the left. And you can see the chinstrap and the gentoo penguin amongst the 4 to the right of your screen. And then the king penguin, which is very rare in Antarctica, but does occasionally occur. It's mainly a Falklands and South Georgia thing. And then finally on the right, the big daddy of them all, the emperor penguin. It will be an absolute day of your life as and when we see one of these emperor penguins. Hoping we do, of course. But there's so many ways to enjoy penguins as well. And that's one of the joys about Antarctica. It's not just about ticking them off in your book. There's not very many species. It's about the opportunities you have to get to know them, to observe them, to experience what it must be like to be a penguin. And you can do that through drawing or from the previous person through photography, or you can just sit back and try and observe various aspects of their behavior, from calling and display to territorial disputes, living in proximity to neighbors, for example, to the eggs hatching, that start of that new life, and what prospects that particular individual penguin will have in life. And there's the feeding of chicks. If the adult penguins fail to get this right, or if one of them dies, then it's game over. The stakes really, really are high. We're going to leave you with this particular individual penguin. It's the one on the start of the slideshow, but it's also the last one. And I'm leaving it with you because it was the first penguin I ever saw in Antarctica. And we could see it walking towards us from somewhere towards the top right of the screen. And it just walked and walked and walked, and we waited and we waited and we waited. And eventually it came close enough for us to look at and to see a penguin, to see a chinstrap penguin, to see an emperor penguin in its environment at the bottom of the world in Antarctica truly is an experience like no other at all. So I, for one, am very, very excited about returning next year. And I hope that some of you will be there to join us too. So thank you very much for listening to me about this ultimate adventure down to the bottom of the world, to try and get a feel for what it's like to go on an Antarctic cruise, and to get a feel for the type of wildlife that you might see there. So thank you very much indeed for listening to me. I'm now going to stop sharing my screen, if I can get it to work. It's not working. This is sort of the end of the slick bit when I can't get my screen. There we are. I'll stop sharing my screen and hand back to Ed. Ed's giggling in the background. Thank you for that, Ed. There's going to be a technological problem at some point, wasn't there? I'm glad it was at the end rather than the beginning. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, James. Gosh, how fascinating. I had no idea there were so many albatrosses in the world, let alone in Antarctica. We've had some great questions, which I will ask you in a minute. I'm just going to start off while people work out whether they want to pop something in the chat, with asking you a question that came in to me earlier by email, and it was photography related. Your photographs were fantastic, and Tim has asked, obviously the Southern Hemisphere seasons are the opposite of ours, but are there any particular months when this region is most recommendable to a travel photographer? And I'm going to add to that a part 2, if I may, which came up in the chat. A couple of people were asking about, without getting into enormous detail, any particular recommendations on lens, camera, equipment tips?
Sure. I mean, Antarctica is such an amazing place that even with your camera phone, you can't fail to take great photographs. The tourist season is October to March at the limits, but it's particularly November, December, January into February. And those, I would say, are the peak months for photography. November, December is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. In terms of equipment, well, you sort of want as much variety as you've got in your camera bag. So I always take 2 camera bodies, and I take at least 2 lenses. So I have on one camera body, I'll have a wide-angle lens. On the other, I'll have some form of super telephoto lens. So something ranging up to around 400 millimeters would be ideal. You don't really need much more than that because lots of the wildlife comes close. When I was photographing some distant seabirds, I'd have a 500 mil with a teleconverter. But to be honest, that's so heavy, it's not really worth carrying around, and you don't generally need that. If anything, you need towards the shorter end of the focal length. Another thing that's probably worth factoring in is a polarizing filter. If you have one, that will just make your images more contrasty and enable you to get a bit of depth to the whites. It's quite hard to judge exposure in Antarctic photography with all this white going on. So it's worth taking a couple of shots and then sort of having a look at them on the back of your screen and seeing whether you've got the exposure right, that type of thing. And if you haven't got it right, you can always sort it out on the computer later. So it's all fine. You won't fail to take wonderful photos, and you'll be the envy of all your friends.
Okay, and is the temperature going to keep your batteries alive, or is that?
So I've never had a problem. I've been out in -25 in South Georgia without a single problem. You'd keep your spare batteries probably in a pocket close to your body for a bit of warmth. And you're not outside, you're not on shore for days at a time. Your typical shore landing would be 2 to 3 hours perhaps. And so in that time, your batteries can survive, your camera equipment can survive.
Right.
The only problem I've had was when I left my tripod unattended and a freak gust of wind took it onto some rocks, at which point it snapped the lens in 2. So that was a bit of a mistake.
Fantastic. Now I'm going to change subject totally now, because I've noticed several questions coming in on a similar theme. The pre-talk, James had asked me, how can we ensure sustainable tourism to Antarctica, or is any kind of tourism to the continent an unacceptable risk to its environment? And Lorna, I think it was earlier, asked about biosecurity, whether any particular precautions are taken to protect the wildlife. So I don't know, any general comments you've got on that, James?
Yes, I mean, there's a whole range of potential answers for that. The headline is that every ship visiting Antarctica is subject to approval from IATO, which is the International Antarctic Treaty Organization. And under the guidance of a friend, my former expedition leader on that Polar Star ship, who then became boss of IATO, its guidelines have become ever more stringent in terms of environmental protection, in terms of minimizing any potential adverse impact that there could be on the wildlife and ecosystems of Antarctica. So yes, absolutely biosafety protocols. You will be required on a typical journey to hoover out any form of clothing or bag that you're taking ashore. Before you head over to shore, your boots will be disinfected. When they come back from shore, your boots will be disinfected. Simple things like that would avoid the transmission of non-native seeds, for example. How terrible would it be if we introduced some kind of seed that somehow could survive in Antarctica? It might increase the number of plant species recorded, but it wouldn't be right. In terms of big picture environmental concerns, climate change being the big one. I mean, clearly you could argue that any form of getting on an aeroplane is a bad thing, but that's offset by the good things. So, I mean, you can, it's relatively simple to offset your carbon emissions in as far as that can mitigate your own personal impact. The thing I found about Antarctica is that it is such a genuinely life-changing experience that you do not return quite the same person as before you went. You'll come back, it sounds trite to say it, but it's genuinely true. You come back with a different appreciation and approach to life. And that sort of experience enables many people to make quite different decisions from then on. And so, yes, there are downsides to any form of large-scale global tourism, but in Antarctica, it's very, very well managed, and there's a lot of benefits to it too.
Great, thanks. You mentioned leopard seals. I have a question about leopard seals, but also I noticed that Jackie in the chat was asking, maybe in light of recent events in Gibraltar, whether orcas ever bother the zodiacs. Have you heard of anything like that, or maybe they haven't got their behaviour down to Antarctica yet?
No, so I've never come across any incident in Antarctica of orcas trying to nudge over zodiacs or anything like that. Leopard seals, certainly anecdotally, there was one instance of a marine scientist who was diving, being drowned by a leopard seal, but the leopard seal was trying to be friendly, just didn't realise that the person it was trying to be friendly with needed to return to the air sooner than it did. I'm certainly not aware of any incident between leopard seal and visitors. The nearest I've come is one leopard seal that punctured one small part of a zodiac, and we realised that instantly. And the zodiac's absolutely fine. The air is sort of in compartments. So if one goes, you've still got a whole load of others, so you're not in danger. So we just returned to the ship, changed the zodiac, and came back out again. So no, it's not an issue. But nevertheless, you give these things, respect that they deserve. So you don't approach anything to you're never proactive. So you never approach any animal to closer than 5 meters. It used to be the limit. It changed now, but certainly it was 5 meters. And should any whale be coming too close to a zodiac, then almost always the zodiac driver would retreat. Antarctica is the animal's place, and we need to respect that.
Great. We've had a couple of questions that I would put into sort of what's the best time to see category. Someone asked, what's the best month? Susie asked, what's the best month to see whales? And then she also asked in a different, further down, is there a flurry of breeding activity amongst Antarctic birds in the Austral spring?
So yes, in terms of breeding, January, November, December, January are the absolute peaks for breeding. So penguins will be displaying in November on eggs in December. Those eggs will hatch at Christmas-ish, and they'll be feeding chicks in January into the beginning of February. So the classic cycle there. And the other seabirds are generally along those lines. Whales, typically you expect humpback whales in particular to be more numerous in the second half of the season, so post-Christmas. But there's always plenty around in sort of November, December. So that first spring part tends to be the best time for some of the rarer whales, so the beaked whales. So that every month is different, just as every month is different in Britain. So just as April and July will be very different in Britain, so December and January will be different in Antarctica. But every month is absolutely special. You won't want for wildlife experience.
Great, thanks, James. And I see there are a few sort of technical questions about the ship. I would say for all of those, please just drop me a line. I can send you a whole dossier of information on the ship. Yes, the helicopters are included. But I wanted to finish up because we're getting towards 7 o'clock. I really like this question that came into the chat from, where are we? From Claire. Who said, what a wonderful description of a range of animals you describe. Is there any flora or I guess fauna that doesn't have wings that one sees? I know we haven't talked Falklands, and obviously you're going that way, it'd be slightly different, but what about the flora and the fauna?
Yes, so the Antarctic Peninsula does have flowering plants. There's a few species, sub 5 of flowering plants. And it is quite fun to go and find those. So you don't get them everywhere. You generally find them in places that are a little bit more sheltered. My book does cover those because it'd be daft not to include the few plants there are. And obviously there's plenty of life below the waves as well. But for that, you need proper hardcore dry suit, I think, to attempt even to snorkel. I have inadvertently come close to marine life when I fell in once, but I don't intend to repeat that. So I sort of accept there's a whole sort of ecosystem, a whole swathe of marine invertebrates and fish below the waves that I'll never get to see, other than in the mouths or beaks of birds and mammals.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we've got time for one more question. Rasmus Bertelsen has just asked, is there any citizen science during the trip?
So that will depend very much on the ship and the expedition leader and what arrangement they have in place. I would always encourage anybody who wants to contribute their expertise to submit their bird sightings to eBird, to submit their mammal locations to iNaturalist, to ensure that they've given all the data they can on GPS points or whatever it may be to the expedition leader, and that this data is used in some way. So no specific formal arrangement, but certainly informal and independent uses, yes.
Great, James. Well, I think we'll call it a day there. I'm fascinated to see that your audience has been covered the range of ages from 10 upwards. So it's been really entertaining, very educational, and I haven't been to Antarctica. It's absolutely made me want to go, and I'm sure it has everyone here. So thank you on all our behalves. Thank you, James, very much indeed.
Thank you, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure talking about Antarctica to you.